Chrystia Freeland is one of the most influential and polarizing figures in modern Canadian politics. To supporters, she is a skilled global operator, a tough negotiator, a principled defender of democracy. To critics, she represents elite power, global institutions, and a political class increasingly detached from everyday Canadians. So today we're doing what this channel does best. We're laying out the strongest arguments on both sides. Because to understand the controversy around Chrystia Freeland, you first have to understand how she rose so quickly. Her rise wasn't accidental. Before politics, she was a journalist at the Financial Times, Reuters, and the Globe and Mail. She reported from Russia and Eastern Europe. She wrote books on global economics and inequality. She spoke multiple languages. She understood trade, power, and diplomacy. But Freeland didn't build power over decades. She entered Parliament through a by-election and reached cabinet in under 2 years, a pace almost unheard of in Canadian politics. The question isn't whether it was legal, it's whether that's how democratic power should move. Supporters argue this rise reflects competence, not favoritism. They say she earned trust because she delivered results. Critics see something else. They argue her rise reflects elite grooming, not democratic momentum. She moved from global media to global institutions, straight into the highest levels of government. No long grassroots career, no slow climb. To them, Freeland represents a political class that circulates power among the same networks: media, academia, global forums, and government. The concern isn't her resume, it's who that resume serves. And this is only the beginning of the controversy, because Freeland's influence doesn't stop at domestic politics. Her relationship with Ukraine is undeniable, and over time, it has become political. Freeland is of Ukrainian descent. She has spoken publicly about Ukraine for decades. She was active there during the late Soviet period. She speaks Ukrainian. Russia sanctioned her personally in 2014. And as Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister and later Finance Minister, she became one of Ukraine's strongest Western advocates. Since then, Canada has committed tens of billions of dollars in military, humanitarian, and financial support to Ukraine, making it one of Ukraine's most consistent allies relative to population size. Supporters argue this is exactly why Canada's response has been effective. They say Freeland helped push Canada to act early, decisively, and in coordination with allies. From their view, Canada's financial support isn't personal, it's strategic. Supporting Ukraine weakens Russian aggression, it reinforces NATO alignment, and it signals Canada's commitment to democratic allies. They also emphasize something important. Canada didn't act alone. The United States, the European Union, and the G7 moved in parallel. From this perspective, Freeland didn't drag Canada into a position. She helped place Canada at the center of it. But critics raise a different question. Not whether Ukraine deserves support, but how much influence one individual should have over long-term national policy. They argue Freeland has been one of the most vocal and persistent voices inside government on Ukraine, and that her personal history may amplify urgency beyond neutral assessment. At the same time, Canada's financial commitments continue to grow, even as domestic pressures mounted. Critics point to rising debt, inflation, housing shortages, healthcare strain. And they ask a simple question: would Canada's level of financial support look the same without Freeland's influence at the cabinet table? That question intensified when Freeland accepted a formal advisory role with the Ukrainian government in January 2026. To critics, this didn't prove disloyalty, but it confirmed long-standing concerns. Not that Canada shouldn't support Ukraine, but that the lines between advocate, policymaker, and advisor had blurred. They worried about conflict of interest, and whether policy was being shaped more by conviction than distance. Supporters respond with a different point. They note that Freeland resigned her seat as a member of Parliament after accepting the advisory role, specifically to avoid conflict. To them, this wasn't proof of overreach. It was proof of accountability. Critics disagree. They argue the resignation came only after backlash. They asked why the role was accepted in the first place, why the optics were misjudged, and why resignation wasn't immediate. To them, the episode reflects a deeper problem, a political class increasingly disconnected from public trust. And for many Canadians, that skepticism was already building. Because no discussion of Chrystia Freeland is complete without the 2022 convoy protests. As Finance Minister, Freeland supported invoking the Emergencies Act. She authorized banks to freeze accounts linked to the protest, and she framed the move as restoring order. Supporters say the moment was extraordinary. They argue blockades disrupted trade and public order, that traditional policing failed, and that financial tools were temporary and targeted. From this view, Freeland defended the rule of law. Critics strongly disagree. They argue freezing personal bank accounts crossed a line. They say it bypassed due process and turned financial access into a tool of punishment. From this perspective, when dissent carries financial consequences, people don't stay silent because they agree. They stay silent because the cost feels too high. And that leads to a deeper question. If the government can cut off your personal finances for protesting, what freedom remains? Which brings us to the real issue underneath all of this. Who does Chrystia Freeland represent? To supporters, she represents competence, global influence, democratic solidarity. To critics, she represents elite consensus, centralized power, and distance from ordinary citizens. She is not just a person. She is a symbol of globalization, of technocracy, of a political era many Canadians are now questioning. Chrystia Freeland is no longer in Parliament, but the debates around her are far from over, because in the end, this isn't really about her. It's about what kind of leadership Canadians want: global or local, technocratic or democratic, moral clarity or institutional restraint. This is facts, no feelings. We don't tell you what to think. We ask which arguments stand up to scrutiny.